Our Father and our God, we are so grateful for this day and for everything that you've blessed us with. No matter our struggles, we can always look to you for strength and support and guidance. And Father, we ask you today to be with us in class and to sit with us, to help guide our thoughts and our discussion. Help us, Father, to take away from it what you would have us learn and to grow closer to you. This is our prayer in Christ's name. Amen.
Amen.
All right, so once again, today our discussion is going to be on the fall of the Hasmonean dynasty. So the fall of the Hasmonean dynasty and the rise of Herod marks a pivotal period in Jewish history. It bridges the gap, between Jewish independence and Roman domination. So emerging from the triumph of the Maccabean revolt against the Greek Seleucid Empire, the Hasmoneans brought the Jewish people their first taste of independence since the Babylonian captivity in the early 500s. However, by the time of their rule, the Hasmonean leaders, they had become deeply influenced, remember, by the Hellenistic culture. Blending Greek, they blended Greek customs into their regular daily Jewish lives. They combined the roles of high priest and king into a single entity. But their reign was marked by corruption and internal power struggles. We remember some of them. That doesn't sound familiar at all, does it? No. None. Meanwhile, Rome steadily expanded its reach, consuming territories in Macedonia, Asia Minor, Syria, and positioned itself as a looming force over Judea. So that turbulent backdrop set the stage for the rise of Herod and the transformation of Judea's political landscape. So you see the mix there of the religious along with the politics. So we're going to watch this video, and he's going to discuss a little bit of that, and then we're going to go ahead and have some discussion on what he talks about.
If you open up a Bible to Matthew chapter 2, verses 16 to 18, you'll encounter one of the most notorious stories in any religion. Suspicious of a prophecy about a new king, Herod the Great tricked the Magi into telling him where baby Jesus was born. Then he sent his soldiers to massacre every child under the age of 2 in Bethlehem. It's a scene of shocking cruelty, one that has ensured that King Herod's name is still synonymous with evil, even to this day. But what if we told you there was more to Herod's story? Born in southern Palestine in 73 BC, Herod was a man at the center of events that has shaped history. He was there when Rome was transformed from a republic to an empire. He consorted with Julius Caesar, he befriended Mark Antony, and he submitted to the rule of Augustus. As king of Judea, he rebuilt the Second Temple, saved the Olympic Games from bankruptcy, and protected Jewish power across the world. Yes, he died an unloved tyrant, hated by his people, his name forever stained with the blood of the innocent. This, in the video today, is the story of how one great man became the tyrant of all history. When Herod was born in 73 BC, it was a great time to be from a Jewish family. Roughly 100 years before, a group of priests known as the Maccabees had rebelled against the Seleucid Empire and turned Jerusalem into an independent city-state. For the first time in a long time, the Jews were beholden to no one. That no one included the superpower of the era, and that was, of course, the mighty Roman Republic, with whose blessing Judea kept its independence. Unfortunately for Herod, his family's Jewish roots weren't as clear-cut as he might have liked. The son of a wealthy, ambitious man known as Antipater, Herod was by birth part Edomite, part Arab. Although his father's family had been practicing Jews for a century, they were still seen as outsiders in Judea, a stigma that kept the family from holding any power. But Herod's dad, Antipater, was nothing if not ambitious, and there was no way that he was going to let his murky origins halt his family's rise. The year Herod turned 6, Antipater got his chance. In 67 BC, Alexandra Salome, the Queen of Judea, died. Unfortunately, she died without leaving a clear line of succession, and her two sons, they elected to take their claims to the battlefield. And so began the first of a series of wars that are going to rack Judea for the rest of this video. On one side was the Queen's son, Hyrcanus II. On the other was Hyrcanus's brother, Aristobulus. Spoiler alert here, you only need to remember the Hyrcanus guy. As the war got underway, Hyrcanus came to Herod's dad to beg for his support. Antipater agreed, but not because he thought Hyrcanus was in the right. In their short meeting, Antipater realized just how weak and easy to manipulate Hyrcanus was. And, well, what could be better than having a weak, manipulatable king on the throne when he owes you a favor? By 63 BC, the war was moving decisively in Hyrcanus' favor. Besieged in the temple, Aristobulus was fast running out of options. Faced with the imminent collapse of his claim to the throne, Aristobulus decided to roll everything on one crazy gamble. At the time, the Roman general Pompey was riding around the eastern Mediterranean, conquering, well, just about everything in sight. So Aristobulus bunged the general a massive bribe to invade Judea on his behalf. This, well, would turn out to be a rather hilariously bad move. When word arrived, Pompey moved his army on Jerusalem. Then he assessed the situation and came to the conclusion that Aristobulus was going to lose, and pocketed Aristobulus' money and sided with Hyrcanus in order to finally defeat him. Amusing as this might be, it was also a major historical turning point. In the wake of Aristobulus' defeat, Pompey annexed large parts of the once independent Judea. He then installed the victorious Hyrcanus on the throne as a Roman pliant king. And just like that, the era of an independent Jewish state, it came to a close. In its place began an era of Jerusalem under the heel of Rome. Not everyone was upset by this, though. For Herod's dad, Antipater, Pompey's intervention was like winning the lottery. With Hyrcanus II in charge, Antipater began happily cooperating with the new Roman authorities and establishing himself as the real power behind the throne. Not that the population of Judea made this easy. In 57 BC, an anti-Roman uprising forced Hyrcanus and Antipater to call the Roman army back in order to save their butts. This time, it was Mark Antony that answered the call. Like Pompey before him, Mark Antony subdued Jerusalem with ease. In the aftermath of the campaign, he was introduced to Antipater's now 16-year-old son. Despite being 10 years older than Herod, Mark Antony hit it off with the boy. Pretty soon, they were firm friends. It was a friendship that would soon make Herod the most powerful man in Judea. There's a peculiar curse that afflicts small states on the doorsteps of superpowers. Each time the winds of change ripple through the corridors of power, the smaller state has to hunker down in case everything it holds dear is simply blown away. In Rome in 53 BC, well, a hurricane, it was a brewing. For 7 years, the Republic had been under the sway of something called the First Triumvirate, a collection of three great men, all hoping to one day become the undisputed ruler. The first was Pompey, the old benefactor of Antipater and Hyrcanus II. The second was a man known as Crassus. The third, well, that was Julius Caesar. In May 53 BC, Crassus died, ending the First Triumvirate. With the third part of their trio gone, it could only be so long before Caesar and Pompey turned on one another. In January 49 BC, well, they did. The civil war that ripped its way through the Roman Republic smashed apart old certainties everywhere. In Judea, a presumably panicked Antipater and Hyrcanus were forced to choose who to throw their support behind. Pompey, the man who had given them power, or Caesar, the man Mark Antony now fought for. In the end, Antipater went for Caesar. It could have been a catastrophe, the first step along a long path that ended with victorious Pompey having Antipater's entire family crucified. Instead, though, it became the making of them. On August the 9th, 48 BC, Caesar annihilated Pompey's army at the Battle of Pharsalus. Broken, Pompey ran only to be assassinated later that year. In the aftermath, you better believe old Julius did not forget who his friends were. In 47 BC, Antipater was rewarded for ditching Pompey by being made procurator, or financial governor, of Judea. Not only that, but he was given Roman citizenship, something he was able to pass on to his son. And Antipater, he had big plans for his new citizen son. That same year, 47 BC, Antipater pulled some strings and had the 26-year-old Herod made governor of Galilee. This was the first time the ancient world got a good look at the sort of ruler that Herod would be. The results, well, they were as shocking as you might be expecting. As the governor of Galilee, Herod's first task was to take care of some partisans who were hiding out in caves trying to overthrow the Roman-backed state and calling themselves New Maccabees. Everyone expected Herod to wage a conventional war. Instead, the new governor located the cave system the rebels were hiding in, sent in soldiers with the orders to massacre everyone. It was a day of bloodshed so great that it triggered riots in Jerusalem. Herod was actually hauled before the religious authorities and threatened with death for his actions. But Herod stood his ground. Before the highest priests of Judaism, he asserted his right as governor to deal with rebels as he saw fit, including wholesale murder. Despite his brutality, Herod was let off free, escaping the death penalty. It was the first major scandal that he was implicated in, but it certainly wouldn't be the last. If the people of Judea were hoping that the days of political shockwaves from Rome battering them senseless were over, well, events soon proved otherwise. Just 3 years after one civil war propelled Herod and Antipater to the top, another came along that threatened to destroy them. On March the 15th, 44 BC, Julius Caesar was assassinated in Rome by Brutus and Cassius. The deed done, the two traitors fled to the east of the Republic. Back in the Eternal City, Mark Antony and Caesar's nephew Octavian declared a new war in order to exterminate the assassins. Unfortunately for Judea, this meant once again being caught right in the middle of things. From his new power base in the east, Cassius ordered all provinces to pay for his war against Mark Antony and Octavian. That meant Judea coughing off 15,000 kilograms of silver, or its inhabitants being put to the sword. As procurator, the job of collecting money, well, that fell to Antipater. It's possible to read Antipater's willingness to cooperate with Cassius as a way of protecting Herod, but given what we know about Antipater's opportunism, it's just as easy to imagine that it fit his loyalties once again like a weasel playing bogs. And the people of Judea, they certainly saw it as the latter. In 43 BC, one of Antipater's own tax collectors, he assassinated him. When Herod got news that his father had been killed, he flew into a rage. With permission from Cassius's forces, he tracked down the assassin and murdered him. It could easily have been Herod's last ever act of violence. In 42 BC, Mark Antony and Octavian, now formed into the second triumvirate alongside Marcus Aemilius Lepidus, defeated Cassius and Brutus. With the war over, Mark Antony went from warrior to avenging angel, riding across the provinces that had supported Cassius and leaving death and destruction in his wake. This should have been bad news for Herod, who was suddenly stuck with explaining why Antipater had leaped into bed with Cassius. But Herod had apparently picked up a trick or two from his old man. He told the avenging angel, well, of course Daddy had to support Cassius. He'd have destroyed Judea if he didn't. But, I mean, honestly, bro, we always wanted you to win. You know that, right? You were always our guy. How true this was debatable, but Mark Antony, he trusted his old friendship with Herod just enough to buy it. Rather than kill him, he made Herod Tetrarch of Galilee, its ruler. And he also made Herod's brother Tetrarch of Jerusalem. Suddenly, Heraclius II was reduced to a figurehead. Real power in Judea now lay in the hands of Antipater's sons. This turned out to be a pretty hard sell for Judea's population. Remember, Herod's family was seen as not really Jewish, but rather fake Jews who got into bed with the hated Romans. So when some dudes called the Parthians suddenly attacked in 40 BC, most Jews decided to side with them. Amid the fighting, Heraclius II was put in chains, had his ears sliced off, and was dragged away to captivity in Babylon. Herod's brother, the Tetrarch of Jerusalem, committed suicide rather than face the same fate. Of the three rulers of Judea, only Herod escaped. As the Parthians rampaged, he ran to the only safe place he could think of, Rome. In the Eternal City, Herod was forced to beg the second triumvirate for help. Mark Antony and Octavian, they listened, and they finally agreed on one condition. Herod would have to prove himself worthy by retaking Jerusalem. For the next 3 years, Herod led a Roman army against the Parthian puppet government ruling Judea. The bitter civil war, it claimed many lives, and it ruined Herod's reputation further among the Jewish population, but it worked. In 37 BC, Jerusalem fell and Herod rode into the city. Aged just 36, Herod had done it. He'd taken back what was his and proved himself worthy to his Roman clients. That same year, he had his highest honor yet bestowed upon him. No longer would Herod merely be Tetrarch of Galilee ruling alongside another Tetrarch and a figurehead like Hyrcanus. Rather, from this point on, there would only be one title befitting a warrior like Herod. He would be King of Judea. Herod's first few years on the throne were spent trying to desperately apply a veneer of legitimacy to his rule. This meant divorcing his first wife, banishing her from court, and remarrying a woman named Marianna, who just happened to be a princess from an old ruling dynasty. It also meant begging the now defeated Parthians to send Hyrcanus II back from Babylon. This might seem like an odd choice. Hyrcanus was the only other guy around with a legitimate claim to Herod's throne. Unfortunately for Herod, though, the captured king was still popular in Judea, so Herod arranged to have Hyrcanus brought back and treated with the utmost respect on the unspoken condition that Hyrcanus go around being all like, gee, this Herod guy, super great king, right? We should probably do what this guy says. Right, guys? Right? With this done, he went about winning over the populace. Over the next 5 years, he built massive new city walls for Jerusalem and a brand new citadel to protect the temple, named Antonia, after Mark Antony, naturally. He even had coins minted showing himself alongside traditional Jewish objects just to hammer home the point that he really, really was a Jewish king. But, as we've already seen time and again in this video, the fate of Judean rulers, it was not decided in Judea, but rather off in Rome. And Rome, it was gearing up for yet another civil war. In 33 BC, the Second Triumvirate went the way of the First Triumvirate and unceremoniously collapsed. 2 years after that, in 31 BC, Octavian and Mark Antony decided to fight each other to the death. For Herod, this was the first time that he found himself caught between two Roman factions without Antipater around. This was a problem because Herod lacked Antipater's wily political instincts. While his father had been happy to chuck old allies like Pompey and Caesar when he thought the winds were blowing against them, Herod was just a bit too loyal to his friends. As the armies of Octavian and Antony gathered, Herod threw his lot in with Antony. And you can probably guess at this point where this is going. On September 2nd, 31 BC, Octavian demolished Antony's forces at the Battle of Actium. Antony was forced to flee into hiding, where he and Cleopatra committed suicide. At the same very time, a summons landed on Herod's desk, calling him to Rhodes to explain himself to Octavian. Now, if you've ever had to go before your boss after making some colossal mistake, you may have the faintest inkling of what Herod was feeling on that long and lonely boat ride. Unlike when he had to explain Antipater's actions to Mark Antony, Herod had no friendship with Octavian that he could fall back on. Worse, as a guy who had literally named citadels after Antony, Herod was intimately connected to Octavian's enemy. Perhaps this says something of Herod's state of mind that his last act before leaving Judea was to execute Hyrcanus II. That way, if Herod was executed in turn, at least the throne would stay in his family. But it turns out Herod really could be as wily as Antipater. Once in Rhodes, Herod didn't even bother trying to lie. He boldly told Octavian that he had supported Mark Antony to the death, that had been loyal to the general for decades and would remain loyal even now. Octavian listened, and when Herod was done, presumably he gave him a wry smile before saying that Herod's loyalty was a far more useful asset to Rome than someone who would try and worm their way out of trouble. He then reconfirmed Herod as the king of Judea. It's pretty hard to imagine what would have been going through Herod's mind on that boat ride home. I mean, against all odds, his truth-telling gamble, it had absolutely paid off. Octavian might not exactly trust him, but he certainly respected him at least. And in Octavian's good books was exactly where the king of Judea wanted to be. So 3 years after the meeting in Rhodes, Octavian finally completed his takeover of the Roman Republic. He took the name that history today knows him by, and that is Augustus. After half a century of bloodshed, Rome's transformation into an empire, it was finally complete. With the drama of the empire's creation out of the way, Herod was able to finally settle into actually ruling Judea. Between 27 and 20 BC, he built up an image of himself as a sort of pagan Jewish ruler, one he hoped would appeal to both Judea's population and also his Roman backers. But if neither side was ever really convinced by Herod's posing, they couldn't ignore his material achievements. As king of Judea, Herod spent his time building new stuff like Bob the Builder on cocaine. Jerusalem got a new amphitheatre, market, royal palace, and a ton of new homes to replace those that were destroyed by an earthquake. New aqueducts brought fresh water into the city. On the fringes of Judea, huge new fortresses were being built to protect the kingdom. Some of these, such as Masada, are still extant and impressive. Then there was the money spent abroad shoring up Judea's image. Iconic cities like Damascus and Beirut were given Herod-sponsored makeovers. When the Olympic Games was going to go bankrupt, Herod stepped in and he saved it. This largesse was accompanied by an unmistakable increase in Judean power. Augustus twice visited Herod in Jerusalem, and each time he handed over new land to the king. In 20 BC, Judea had expanded to include swaths of modern Syria, Lebanon, and Jordan. As Judea's prestige grew, those in Rome took notice. Soon Jerusalem was flooded with Roman playwrights, historians, and philosophers, all eager to see the booming city-state. And you'd better believe Herod tried to use this power for good. He was a vocal defender of Jews living in other states, often going out of his way to appease their Gentile hosts. But, of course, this is still Herod we're talking about here. Underneath all of this glitz and glamour lurked a dark side. On the streets, ordinary Judeans were suffering enormous tax burdens to pay for Herod's projects. On top of that, there were uneasy questions hovering over Herod's Jewishness. With his fondness for pagan Roman things, many believed in Jerusalem that their ruler was secretly trying to sabotage their culture. Not that it was all bad for ordinary men and women, though. During the horrific famine of 25 to 24 BC, it was Herod's Roman contacts that stopped the disaster by arranging huge shipments of grain to Judea. But it wasn't until 20 BC that Herod made his greatest attempt to win Jewish hearts. He decided to rebuild the Second Temple. Way back in 519 BC, the Neo-Babylonians had destroyed the First Temple. A replacement had been built, but it was definitely, let's say, modest. Under Herod, that was about to change, though. Everything you think of when you think of Jerusalem's temple was a result of Herod's construction spree. The sweeping walls, vast towers, and great courtyard covering the Temple Mount all came into being because of Herod. The famous Western Wall you can see standing today, yep, that's another Herod project. Not that this grand new temple mollified everyone. Herod kitted it out with too many Roman touches, too many architectural nods to Judea's imperial overlords. Nor did he take criticism kindly. When a small sect of radical Jews tore down a Roman eagle symbol from the new temple, Herod had them all burned alive. Still, as Herod entered the last decade of his life in 14 BC, the signs were all there that he might go down in history as not so bad a ruler. Indeed, he might even have lived up to his billing of Herod the Great. But you and I both know that there is one final act to come. One of the fascinating things about Herod is that despite still being a household name 2,000 years later, he often feels like he was only ever a bit player in two major stories. For most of his life, the story Herod appeared in was the epic novel The Rise of the Roman Empire. But as he entered old age, the king of Judea found himself cast as the villain in an even more famous tale. That's right, it's about time that we talked about Jesus. There's a bit of a debate about when Christ's birthday actually was, with it generally being agreed that it's somewhere from 6 BC to 4 BC. Whichever is true, by the time Christ was born, Herod's rule was in a very bad place. The trouble had really started in 10 BC, when Herod had waged war against the Nabateans, and so screwed up the campaign that it had fallen from Augustus's favour. This sudden demolition in status seems to have triggered a crisis of paranoia in the king. Convinced supporters of the dead Herodes II were plotting in the shadows, Herod began a ruthless campaign to root out suspected enemies. He'd already put his wife Mariamne to death, but now he also had her brother, mother, grandfather, and children all killed. Herod even had two of his own sons, Antipater and Aristobulus, executed. When Augustus heard, he joked it would be safer to be Herod's pet pig than one of his sons. Nor were those outside of Herod's court safe. In his last years, Herod had hundreds of ordinary Judeans thrown in dungeons and tortured. He masterminded gruesome public executions to keep order. Rumors started to swirl that it defiled the tombs of David and Solomon, that it had taken 9 wives in defiance of Jewish customs. Although there were still triumphs, such as the opening of Herod's great new port city, Caesarea, in 9 BC, but they were all overshadowed by a cloud of paranoia that was hanging over Judea. It wasn't helped by a horrific illness that the king contracted that ate away at his flesh, which is thought today to be Fonet's gangrene. The disease left Herod so mad that he gave insane orders, from the mass execution of 300 soldiers to a demand that all Judean nobles be dragged to an amphitheater on his death and then shot full of arrows. It was against this dark background that a sect of Jewish scholars suddenly announced the time of the Messiah was almost upon them. And so we come to Herod's most infamous legacy. Matthew chapter 2, verse 16 to 18 tells us that Herod became worried about the prophesied Messiah, eventually ordering every child under 2 in Bethlehem to be put to death. Known as the Massacre of the Innocents, the killing is controversial among historians today because it only appears in Matthew's Gospel. The other Gospels don't mention it, nor do the accounts of Josephus or Nicholas of Damascus. Still, from what we know of Herod's mental state in his last few years, having a bunch of random babies killed would certainly have been completely in character. Thankfully, the massacre would be the last awful thing that the king of Judea ever did. In 4 BC, Herod the Great finally passed away in Jericho. This was only a handful of months after a failed suicide attempt. Traditionally, it's thought he died in March, although no one really knows for sure. After his passing, Augustus decreed Judea would be split into 3 parts. The kingdom that Herod had helped create, it was no more. In the end, the life of Herod was defined less by who he was than by those who were around him. The lives of Julius Caesar, Mark Antony, Augustus, and of course Jesus continue to fascinate us even now, 2 millennia later. To have been a part of all their stories is a remarkable achievement in itself, even if Herod may not have seen it that way. The poem Ozymandias by Percy Shelley tells us of a traveller who finds a great broken statue of some king in the middle of a desert. Now the statue's pedestal, it declares, "Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair." But there is nothing left of this dead king's deeds, no hints of his life, just endless sand. In the desert of history, it's tempting to think the same has come of Herod, with his name still only just about visible thanks to a single verse in a single book of the Bible. But as this video has hopefully shown, there was more to the life of Herod than one horrific act. He may not have been a good man, or even a particularly clever man, but Herod the Great was certainly one thing. He was a man worth remembering. So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did, please...
That was a lot of information in a very short amount of time. You see, I actually started to write down some of the names, and I didn't get past the first one. There was so much information in there. But the good thing is we don't have to remember all that information. Really what's important is understanding it, understanding how things were affected by the different things going on. We don't need to necessarily know all of the dates, all of the names, all of the times, that kind of thing. So when we think about it and think about the information that was presented in there, let's think about the important stuff. Like, what role did Rome play leading up to this point in the history of the Jewish people?
They put him in charge.
They put him in charge, Rome? What other?
He was not elected.
Well, Rome was a really strong political ally, weren't they, for the Jewish people? Somebody that they could kind of, lean on, and they kind of needed that. And Rome also bailed the Jewish people out and provided kind of a stabilizing force, What mistakes did the rulers make leading up to the rise of Herod?
Total corruption.
Yeah, where do you start, right?
Yeah. Civil war between the groups that, wanted to be head of Rome. I mean, it was kind of Sin City.
Well, they were also pretty naive about the intentions of Rome, weren't they? Why would this big, giant power befriend this little, tiny thing over here? You gotta want something, right?
Money.
Strategic importance.
Yeah.
And what else? What other mistakes did they make?
They got rid of the republic and went to emperors. That's one of the big mistakes.
They relied on a foreign power, a foreign entity, to settle internal problems, right? Go to somebody else to solve our issues. Well, do you think their issues were solved in a way that benefited them in doing that? Probably not. Well, what lessons can be learned about making alliances with foreign powers?
They cheat.
What's your answer?
We're bigger than you, we'll end up telling you what to do.
You lose control.
One of the things specifically said in there that stands out. Over and over again, all of these different leaders, Herod particularly, but one of the things that all of the leaders had in common was that they all owed somebody else a debt, didn't they? And they had to base decisions, the things that they did, they had to base on their loyalty to somebody else rather than on their own morality. And one of the things that Drew has noted on here, he says that you get corrupted by those that you draw close to. They infect you. We can see some of that in here, in not just Herod, but in a lot of those rulers. So what gave Herod legitimacy? How did he have any legitimacy to rule Judea?
That's power from Rome.
Yeah, he had the backing of Rome, an army, right? Backing him.
It started with his father, when his father came into rule, and his father was a good finagler. So that helped him be seen in the eyes of the Roman government, they said, while he was younger. So that gave them, they saw him earlier on, and then that helped put it in.
Well, yes.
It's also kind of crazy. You don't mess with a crazy person.
I don't know if he was really completely nuts at this point yet or not.
You could tell he's very, very power sensitive, right? If anybody comes near that throne, like
Guy's a little unhinged.
So you've got fear working for you in that case, where there might not be as many people who want to step up and rise against you. They know that he's going to get your head.
So we got an unhinged guy with a big army from a foreign power. What about internally? What about closer to home than that? What else gives him legitimacy?
Well, he sorta is a Jew.
Sorta, kinda is a Jew, yeah.
And not everybody knows that it sorta is a kind of Jew.
Yeah. Well, he's one of us, right?
But he also learned that he had to make connections, and he had to elevate his name, and I'm sure he had people in his pocket, and people that were this all seems very political, right? So you know what comes with that, and maybe people going against his morals to back the power and the money.
And, well, did he? We know he was a little unhinged. That he had an army. He was kind of sort of a Jew. Did he do any good?
Yeah, he built all kinds of major works, benefit the people.
Yeah.
He's on our side. He's doing things for us.
Yeah.
What's the big thing he rebuilt?
Temple,
Yeah.
water.
Water.
Cities.
All right. So yeah, he's a little off his rocker, but maybe we can handle it. He's kind of a good guy sometimes, maybe a little, sort of, kind of. So yeah, it gave him a little legitimacy. So how did we kind of talked about how Judea grew during it. He rebuilt stuff. He supported rebuilding and programs. How else did Judea grow?
The Roman Empire gave him extra every time, not Caesar, but Augustus came.
Yeah. He stayed close to Rome. They kept giving him more lands, huh? Increased it. Now we get to his crazy a little bit. How did he maintain control? See, so we kind of went over everything that Drew had on his list. So hopefully these next ones we're not stepping on anything he's going to go into. But how did Herod maintain control over that diverse and, obviously, a lot of times hostile population?
He had a big army.
What does that army do, though? I've got a big army. If I'm a nice guy and I've got a huge army, are you particularly afraid of me? No. You might even want to be real close to me, huh? Because I can protect you. Is that what he did, though? How did he rule?
He had people arrested and tortured and
Fear.
publicly executed.
Burned alive,
Ruled by fear.
Heavy-handed. He used fear and force. He didn't just have the Roman army. He had a personal army. And he had secret police. So you didn't even know if you were talking to somebody and you expressed dissent. Is that something you would feel comfortable doing? So what challenges did Herod face in balancing the Roman expectations and Jewish tradition?
Couldn't lean too far to one side. He kind of had to have his foot on both sides.
What was Romans, on the side of the Romans, what would be their big expectation?
Money and peace.
yeah.
Yep, money, taxes, right? Got to pay your dues, and who you got to be loyal to? Rome. Yep. They don't want you having a rebellion or anything like that. How about the Jewish? What would be their expectation?
Get rid of Rome.
Huh?
Get rid of Rome.
Get rid of Rome.
Follow the Jewish traditions.
Yeah.
There you go. Follow Jewish laws and customs. That was what's important to them. Herod's Hellenistic building projects. What about those? He's building these projects. Remember, what did it say that happened? Was he open to criticism
No.
about his projects? What happened to those who, you remember he had a symbol on a building project that they didn't like and they tore it down? What happened to those guys?
Burn him alive.
Yeah, I don't like the way that building looks. Well, now we don't have to worry about what you like.
Send a message.
It pleased the Roman leaders, his building, his style, his design, with all of those details in it. But the Jews didn't like it, and getting too far away from their tradition.
And also they had to pay for it. They had one way from their tradition, and they had to pay to do it, have it done,
Mm-hmm.
their taxes.
Kind of makes you think, no taxation without representation, right?
It's kind of funny, they hated the tax collectors worse than they hated common criminals.
Yeah.
I mean, tax collectors in that society was the lowest of the low. Criminals were above them.
Yeah. Well, there's some people that feel that way now.
True,
You know,
Remember the IRS.
come April 15th.
yes. Robin Hood was not just a myth, huh?
How about the influences? One of the things that, the reason that these design elements and things upset the Jews, what was the reason for that? Did we have a lot of pagan influences in these design elements? And, did those not kind of rub the Jews the wrong way with their monotheism? So we see all of these little elements in there, and the Jews are going, that's just, this isn't right. And how can we live in cities that have all of these elements that are assaulting us every day? Assaulting our religion, assaulting our senses with this. But he did have some long-term effects. What were some of those long-term effects of Herod's reign on Judea?
Well, there were really wars in that time, except the ones that he was persecuting. The area overall was peaceful, I think. There wasn't somebody coming in from the north or the south trying to take over.
Okay. Jim, what were you?
Masada is still there. The western wall is still there, of the temple. So, and then there are other ruins, Caesarea, things that he built are somewhat still there. And did they say that he saved the Olympics?
Yes.
Yes.
So he had some, building projects. I was amazed looking at that. Just, I've heard, architecturally speaking, how young the U.S. is. When we talk about old buildings, they're not considered old buildings in Europe.
No.
They've got buildings that are much, much older. And then you see things like that are still standing after all of this time. It's just amazing. Yes.
I was privileged to go to Europe in 1984 for the first time, and I was impressed by how old these buildings were. And I came back and I asked someone I worked with, how old is an old building? They said 50 years. And I said, I went through an arch that was built in 179 AD.
Yeah. Here, if you've got a 100-year-old farmhouse, they make it like, wow, that's going to fall apart.
And they have, city buildings or whatever built in the 1200s.
It's just amazing. That's a lasting legacy right there as far as architectural. How about his rule? What long-term effect did his rule have on the Jewish people? Do you think at the sake of getting cabbages thrown at me, what effect does an unpopular ruler have on the people?
You never forget them.
Never forget them.
Unites the people against them.
Yes.
Some of them. Some people might agree with some of his stuff, especially, maybe they're not completely against it. You always have somebody who goes, you know what? I don't really like that guy, but I like what he did, so I'm going to side with him. Yes.
Yeah, I think it's in Matthew 22:16. We read of the Herodians and the people who continue to follow him, and then we got the opposition of it, the zealots. So you have these political parties still moving on even after his time that are continuing in these various ideologies. So there's some kind of support, some kind of favor for what he was doing, like we said, with some of the good things that are going on. So politically, his movement still pushed forward.
So you're saying that politics can cause division among religious people? I'm not
Every
buying
so
that.
often.
I'm not buying that. So how did Herod's reign set the stage for political and social environment during the time of Jesus? George kind of hit on it a little bit there.
Well, he established a Jewish tradition of religion, but not pure. So there was argument about, well, is this right or is that wrong? the Sadducees and the Pharisees were at each other all the time, but they were in the religious group that was practicing in the temple.
And what did they, because there had been so much upheaval, and this, with the, I mean, they were buying the priesthood, right? There was this, all of this other stuff going on. And George mentioned it. What did that create? A desire to get back to the way things were?
Well, and this, with the Romans, kind of had been in a step in the right direction, because you think of the Greeks and, their beliefs, all over the place with these multiple gods, and now you've got the Romans coming in, even though they've done some pretty malicious stuff. I mean, they're at least accepting to the faith, and they're doing things that are kind of helping us get there. But then, it seems like during this time, then it politically and religiously, you see they kind of branch out in all kinds of directions. Like we said with the Zealots, and you've got the Essenes too, and we've got the Sadducees, and you have all these various groups that are kind of formed around this demographic, but they're all kind of branching out from here. So it's kind of interesting that it's come together, but now it all seems to branch out, and almost just in time for somebody to pull back together.
So they were longing for a Messiah?
Yeah.
They were ready for one, ready for a unifying. The division among the Jewish factions contributed to unrest. And of course, unrest made them prepared for that. And that unrest caused Roman oversight to increase, leading to stricter control, right? These people are getting out of hand a little bit. We want to control them more. The more we control them, the more they...
So then,
It becomes this cyclic thing, increasing tension and causing them to really be ready for that Messiah. That, as we know, they were expecting something different, weren't they?
Right.
They were expecting a physical king that was going to, wipe out everybody else and save them. And this set the stage for that. So, we are out of time. I thank everybody for being here.